There were three films, all released within a handful of months between each other, that incidentally each imposed a very clear constraint in their filmmaking. Those films are Robert Zemeckis' Here, Steven Soderbergh's Presence, and RaMell Ross's Nickel Boys. These three works restrict the perspective of their films to one, and I guess in Nickel Boys' case, two clear-cut perspectives, and in turn offer new ways of seeing, of refining or uncovering entirely new cinematic techniques to tell their stories. For lack of a better word, these movies use gimmicks that can be off-putting to some, but will be completely refreshing to others. The success to which these formal tricks work will vary from person to person, but irregardless show three different generations of filmmakers, one a seasoned veteran in big-budget Hollywood storytelling, another a fixture of the American independent film scene who continues to reinvent himself with each new film, and then a former documentary filmmaker taking bold swings at the very beginning of his narrative career, who are all dead set on toying with the camera and expanding the visual language of cinema in really exciting ways. In Here, the formal trick is that the entire movie takes place entirely on the same patch of land, tied to a single fixed perspective that for a large chunk of the runtime is placed directly in the living room of a suburban home. But to say it takes place in one room wouldn't exactly be accurate, as Here kicks off in the age of the dinosaurs, moving through the Ice Age, then spinning into a tale of indigenous lovers, right into the colonial era, before settling us primarily in the 20th century. And that's where we meet the Young family, who we spend most of the runtime with, watching them age before our eyes. Our view isn't entirely static, but everything around it undergoes seismic change. We go rather seamlessly from the pre-colonial times right into the living room of a white suburban family at a moment's notice. Our view of time is incredibly non-linear here, hopping back and forth between all of these different eras, formulating an idea about the ways in which small actions can echo across time. Zemeckis conveys this through many points of visual overlap. The frames will either slowly fill out, slide, or fade away instead of hard cut. It's almost like watching live theater, where the set dressings are pulled off stage, carefully transitioning us into the next sequence. There is this overt artifice to everything here that, at first, leaves you kind of hesitant to the film's emotional power. At least it did for me. It wasn't until a rewatch that I was able to fully appreciate what the film had to offer, free of having to warm up to its unique rhythm and odd fixed perspective. This is nothing exactly new for Zemeckis. He has been a practitioner of new technologies, of new ways to tell stories since the start of his career, whether it's in using motion capture technology or live action and hand-drawn animation hybrids. He's always used his cinema, to pretty varying levels of success, to experiment with new or advancing technology, and it's something that at his age of 72 is pretty commendable to see. Here is an expedition throughout time, through ordinary lives that span generations which are in constant conversation with one another. It mostly doesn't click into place. It, like many of Zemeckis' past visual experiments, falls into the uncanny valley and doesn't exactly land the plane emotionally, but I feel like it's the one where his penchant for artifice finds an ideal match in source material, where his tangle of ideas and gimmicks fit neatly into a text about the rhymes and rhythms of history, the inexorable passage of time, and I was ultimately moved by it, even through all of its awkward, maudlin stumbles. But there was another film that also hopped forward and backward through time, but was much more free in its movement and ultimately used its formal gimmick to far more emotionally impactful effect. Nickel Boys is a film about two young black teenagers living in the Jim Crow South. It's filmed almost entirely from the first-person perspective, where Ross and his brilliant cinematographer Jomo Frey use these rigs worn by the actors, allowing us to quite literally embody the protagonists, who are named Elwood and Turner, and we then are able to see the action entirely through their eyes, so attuned to the way the human gaze can meander off to the distance or look downward when apprehensive. Across the film, we jump back and forth between Turner and Elwood's points of view, with the exception of when we flash forward to the future, where an older Elwood wrestles with the trauma from his time at Nickel Academy, and now researches about the many bodies unearthed at the prison decades later. When we hop to this aged version of Elwood, the perspective is not exactly first person anymore. It's more a third person, kind of over-the-shoulder perspective, where we can only see the back of his head, creating this intentional distancing effect that contrasts with the deep immersion of the scenes set in the 1960s. It's no longer a film shot through the eyes of these young men. We're now entirely disconnected from their POV because Elwood no longer sees the world in the same way anymore. Jomo Frey's beautiful images place such immense importance on the seemingly minor things. Watching a magnet slowly slide down off a fridge, a balloon being tossed around by a ceiling fan, a marble bouncing down steps, ribbons slowly floating down from a Christmas tree onto your face. All of these images are a part of the film's mission to convey these deeply sensorial pieces of a life that we may find trivial on the surface, but is felt so deep in our bones. While jarring and disjointed at times, the result is ultimately a beautiful and haunting display of the power of storytelling, of wielding the camera to reshape how a story of this nature could be told. What Ross is doing with the camera is not exactly a novel approach, as films in the past like Hardcore Henry and Into the Void have used the first-person perspective before, but to much different effect. In this film, Ross is using a camera in the first person, alongside his very elliptical editing, to construct a deeply dreamlike view of the world, one that feels less like a video game cutscene and more unmistakably human. This approach gives sentience to the movements of the camera, but its ethereal, disembodied qualities also give this a specter-like quality that could be used to observe and unmoor, like in Steven Soderbergh's Presence. His latest experiment in deeply economical filmmaking offers a ghostly, playful twist on this idea of a first-person camera. The film imposes these very clear ideas within the opening minutes. Every sequence will be a long, continuous shot that is confined entirely to the interior of an old estate, observing an Asian American family who live within these walls. Through brief glimpses of conversations between this family, picked up by the floating camera as it wanders the halls of this large house, we get to learn bits and pieces about them. Their teenage daughter, named Chloe, has been coming to terms with the sudden death of her best friend, which has taken its toll on the entire family, and is one of the main reasons behind their relocation to this new, haunted house. But we also come to learn some pretty apparent tensions between her father, mother, and brother that slowly unspool across the film. Chloe is the only one in the family who senses this supernatural presence in their home. She'll stop right in her tracks and look directly down the barrel of the camera at times, occasionally following it around as if to reach out and touch and feel it. We, the ghost, the camera, watch events through the blinds of a window, inside of a closet, or through the reflection of an old mirror. But this presence also directly interferes with events in the narrative itself. There's a moment where the ghost rearranges Chloe's books while she is taking a shower, or knocks a glass of water off of a nightstand. Soderbergh uses this new perspective as less means for historical or emotional effect, and more so as a pure genre exercise, a way to redefine the ghost story, the haunted house movie, by simply watching a haunting through the eyes of its ghost. The narrative beats and writing for certain characters leave a lot to be desired, but Presence is such an exhilarating visual experiment nonetheless. Equal parts a continuation of Soderbergh's career-long indulgences into formal conceptual conceits, and a really scrappy ghost movie with some simple but effective moments of fright. Here, Nickel Boys and Presence, while covering some similar, some wildly different facets of humanity, all view the camera as a spectator, an observer. In two of the films, the camera is a moving, sentient observer, while the other is a completely static one. Some of these have much grander aspirations than the others, and in some the form and function synthesize more neatly than the rest. But these films, from both immediately recognizable and new creative voices, find new ways of seeing, new ways of embracing the artifice of cinema for maximum impact, to tell stories about history and family, the minority experience in America, and of giving consciousness in some form to the camera. They're all very odd, uniquely affecting films that possess an originality we've been clamoring for in recent years, and yet all three weren't exactly runaway success stories at the box office. The thread that ties these three very different films together, their persistence on using the camera in untapped ways to then show new perspectives on oft-told stories. Once you stop resisting the tricks deployed by these filmmakers and give yourself over to their unique rhythms, you'll find three flawed, but some of the most singular American films of the past 10 years.